So now it's about the Supreme Court, apparently. Bernie supporters should support Hillary to stop the Republicans from stacking the Supreme Court. Is that a better argument? It's not. It's just a restatement of the other arguments, and the response is the same as it is with the other arguments. First, let's acknowledge that it's a desperate reaction. But it states that you can't win the argument that Hillary is substantively better than Trump, so you're just not making it. Instead, you're essentially changing the topic, so it's really a red herring. When you say Hillary isn't better than Trump, that doesn't somehow not apply to the Supreme Court nominees. What would Hillary's Supreme Court nominees look like? They'd be pretty shitty, no doubt. Designed to protect corporate power and uphold the status quo. And remember, Hillary supports a constitutional amendment to limit abortion rights, too. And she only came out in favor of gay marriage after the court ruling, and only because of the court ruling. Hillary Clinton is a conservative, so you should expect her to appoint conservatives. The best case is the status quo. A realistic expectation is actually a shift to the right on the court, and she'll no doubt replace the Democrats that resign with justices that are more conservative. And the conservatives with conservatives. Might be a little less conservative, but overall, you'd be looking at a shift in the court. I think that the results of a Hillary Clinton presidency will probably be that what was once seen as partisan issues will become consensus issues, right? A lot of issues where, liberals might have lost just barely, or that, liberals might have got a swing here and there kind of thing, will become consensus issues. And the Supreme Court will become a rubber stamp for conservative legislation. So, like everything else about Hillary, you should expect her Supreme Court nominations to be horrendous, disastrous even. But they'll be chosen in such a way as to not rock boats. You won't realize this shit has hit the fan until it does, if you do it all. So we get this continuing shift to the right without anybody noticing. Until one day you wake up and you realize that, wait a second, there's now a limitation on how late a pregnancy can be, and the Supreme Court is going to unanimously uphold it. Or uphold it, with one person dissenting, or something like that, right? Whereas that would not be the case right now, right? What about Trump? Well, you'd expect a little subtlety in his picks, although I don't think you should take him seriously on the abortion thing. But let's say you do. Let's say he literally appoints Judge Judy. Now, let's say he somehow gets her confirmed, which he will not. Okay? All of this scaremongering around Trump is ignoring the fact that he has to get his nominations confirmed. He can't just pick anybody. It has to get confirmed. But if he does somehow manage to appoint Judge Judy, well, people are going to riot. People are going to flip out, right? So what do you want? You want 8 more years of the status quo, where they're fucking everybody over and nobody reacts? Is that what you want, really? To just keep on the same, rightward path that Obama has pushed us down? Where liberalism is literally being redefined as moderate conservatism? Do you want that? If you're a wealthy person that lives in the city, you very well might. Or do you want some serious pushback? If you're a working person, you probably do. There's an interesting Sanders anecdote in this interview of Max Blumenthal by Amy Goodman that I was watching while I was eating a few days ago. I don't think it's news, nor is it the crux of the talk. I'm just saying. The anecdote is that Blumenthal went up to Sanders and asked him about his support for Israeli bombing in the Gaza Strip. And rather than respond, Sanders just got up and walked away. Now, there's a few different angles to take on this. One of the angles you can take on it is that Max Blumenthal is the son of one of Hillary Clinton's closest advisors. He certainly distanced himself from that, though. Sanders may have been being a little bit extra careful in ensuring that he didn't say something to the wrong person. May have been somewhat concerned that Max had been sent to get some information, to ask him an awkward question, and ensure it got to the media. Frankly, that's probably paranoid. I would not expect that Max has any significant level of support for Hillary at all. I'd be surprised if he wasn't actively supporting the Green Party, to be frank with you. But it's of all the people that you're going to send to ask that question, Max Blumenthal is just about probably the worst person that could ask the question. It's just the truth of it, right? So there's that angle. The angle that Max pushed was that it's a financial thing. His vote is coming from moneyed interests, and Sanders was essentially for sale to the Israeli lobby. I think the truth is probably somewhere in between. I'm not particularly convinced that AIPAC really likes Sanders very much, that it ever has, or that Sanders would go out of his way to appeal specifically to AIPAC. But he may feel that it's necessary to not provide his opponents with certain types of ammunition that can be used against him, right? I have actually not heard Sanders speak on this particular topic. I will say, though, that nobody has ever argued that Sanders is ideal. Just a lot of points of concern, right? And so support for Sanders is still support for a lesser evil. And in fact, the argument is that Sanders is the lesser evil, while Trump and Clinton are comparable evils. Or maybe even in some ways, Trump may be a lesser evil compared to Clinton. But Sanders is the actual lesser evil, right? And that's why this election is so frightening, is that we can't even really talk about. If Clinton wins, then she's not a lesser evil. And it's the first time in, well, I'm not sure I would say that Obama was a lesser evil. I don't think he's turned out to be a lesser evil. But he was widely perceived as such, and is still widely perceived as such, if you think that, if you think Obamacare is a lesser evil, it's just, it's this. I've been over this. I don't need to go over this again. I think that probably the last really true lesser evil was Gore, if he even was. I'm not even sure he even was, right? Although I'll point out that I've pointed this out before. The last Democratic candidate that I actually supported was John Kerry. I did not support Barack Obama. Because I knew from the start that he was a conservative, and I didn't really have any interest in supporting a conservative Democrat. It's not what I wanted, right? And I'm outside the country, remember, I keep pointing that out as well. So there wasn't really much that Obama was offering that was going to help my country. His insistence on blowing up Pakistan was actually downright frightening to me. So Kerry, I thought, was less. I think that Kerry is a dove. I think he always has been. I think that we missed the boat on pulling out of all of these wars. I think that Kerry could have actually and would have actually wanted to do that. I know a lot of people are going to push back on that, and I'm sure that a lot of the broad aspects of their arguments are probably valid, but I'll find a flaw. I'll find an explanation. At the very least, I think that the desire for peace is actually real in John Kerry. In fact, one of my first reactions went through this. Kerry's different than these other guys and gals, in that I think that he actually does have a real, actual interest, a personal interest, in actually making peace. I don't think Obama ever did. He just thought Iraq was, a stupid tactical decision, right? Clinton is trigger happy, but I think that, and if you look at what Kerry's done, I think it kind of half upholds it. He's been a lot. Well, we haven't had regime change in the last 4 years, have we? Obviously, he inherited a hell of a mess, but I haven't seen anybody fall. So there's that truth of things, right? But I mean, he was the last one I endorsed. The last one that was, but even so, I would have suggested he was the lesser evil, right? Clinton, I don't think we can say Clinton is. I think we can say that Sanders is very clearly, right? And I've just never really taken, all of this talk about corruption. I've never taken it seriously. Okay, it's hard to take him seriously. I think that there's a certain level of naivety that goes into the idea of of it even being possible. How do you propose you take the money out of politics? You'd have to take the money, like you'd have to. I can't come up with an answer. Even in Canada, we have much stricter laws in Canada, but there's loopholes, and the money gets from A to B, right? To really seriously try to get the money out, he would require a police state, right? And I don't think that Bernie Sanders wants a police state either. So I've always just interpreted it as, okay, this is politics. He's working people up, and that's fine. That's what you got to do, right? Support him for his healthcare policy, his environmental policy, his foreign policy. If he's got to work people up to go after the banks, that's what he's got to do, right? But it really is just politics. And if you think otherwise, and he somehow manages to win, you're going to be disappointed, because it's the stuff about the banks that's in the list of things that, like, you can't actually do this. Okay. He could pass some laws. He could break them up. It won't make any difference. Breaking up the banks is not going to make any difference at all. And all of the experts agree on that, right? That was the Krugman debate, right? And Krugman was right. You could put laws on campaign contributions. They'll find loopholes. You could put stronger regulation. They'll buy the regulators. Like, there isn't really an answer, right? In fact, you could take this way back. Way back. You can take this back to Greece. I'm really very much sympathetic to the argument provided by Plato or Socrates, however you would like to say it, that a consequence of freedom is corruption. if you want democracy, there will be corruption. You cannot have democracy without corruption. The moment that you try to remove corruption out of democracy, you end up with a totalitarian state. I'm not going to lay out the argument better than it's laid out in the famous texts. Go for it. Read up on it. There's a reason it's held water for thousands of years. And the reality is that all empirical evidence demonstrates that there's great insight into this. Even when you're talking about, systems of monarchy, the more liberal the systems are, the more corruption there is, and the more stringent. The only way to go after let me phrase this differently. Every time any kind of monarch went after corruption, the result was totalitarianism, right? It was an authoritarian state, right? And frankly, I think Bernie Sanders would choose freedom over totalitarianism, right? He would choose corruption. I think he would accept that, right? It's the bargain, right? If you want democracy, it's, you can't have utopias. Not everything's perfect. You got to take the bad with the good, and that's the bad that comes with democracy is corruption, right? You can maybe try and make it a little bit better, but it's going to be, the outcome is going to be ramped down pretty substantially from his rhetoric, right? So it's just politics, and he is a lesser evil. If we want to have something that's better than that, we're going to have to talk about changing our economic system, right? It's not an issue of the way the political establishment is set up. It's a consequence of capitalism. If we want to eliminate capitalism, we would have to change what we call democracy pretty dramatically, right? It would have to become a lot more collectivist in nature and in scope. And then maybe we can talk about getting rid of corruption once we put property in common, right? But I mean, nobody's talking about that. They're talking about regulation. They're talking about putting people in jail. That doesn't work. Okay, the only way to really get rid of the corruption is to move to socialism, because it's a consequence of democracy and it's a consequence of capitalism. I think Sanders gets that, to be honest with you. I think anybody that's at all left of center understands that. In fact, that's in a lot of ways a litmus test of being left of center. If you think you can eliminate corruption in a capitalist democracy, then you are a right-wing buffoon. Okay? Alright? Anybody at all left of center understands that the only way to eliminate corruption is to eliminate capitalism and dramatically alter what we call democracy, right? So it is just politics. Even if he does a few things, it's not really going to make a difference because it can't. And if you don't realize that it can't, like you're lost in the la la land of market fundamentalism. I'm sorry, you are. Okay. I haven't heard Sanders say anything about this, but I have heard Elizabeth Warren explain away her votes for Israel by saying something like America needs an ally in the Middle East, which reduces to the same fundamental policy that's been in place since 1973. Two important things happened in 1973. There was the oil crisis, which is the part that we're talking about, and there was a war involving Israel and a couple of the countries in the Middle East. Israel won the war. The fact that happened, well, I mean, they're not disconnected things, right? The OPEC oil embargo had a lot to do with the war, but the precise way that this played out, and the fact that the Secretary of actually, was he? I think he was Secretary of State at the time. Was Henry Kissinger. Um, crafted a policy regarding Israel that I think everybody should regret, but at the same time is largely irreversible given the realities of the geopolitics in the area. Okay, so when she says, America needs an ally in the Middle East, and I'm paraphrasing her, um, she's just repeating the same um, policy of Henry Kissinger. This is Elizabeth Warren, that's been in place since 1973. Okay, and it means it's about the reasonable American refusal to accept the Saudis as a full ally. It's not like that's never been on the table, right? American support for Israel was not. Maybe a lot of people that are younger don't realize this, but American support for Israel was not absolute before the Nixon presidency. There was support for Palestinians. I mean, it was a little bit more balanced. Wasn't completely balanced, but it was a little bit more fair. It was the policy that Kissinger brought in '73 that blew the whole thing off, right? And it was a consequence of the oil embargo, because what the Americans said was, wait a second, we can't trust you guys. There was a stronger alliance between the Saudis and the British, which transferred over to the Americans, coming out of actually World War One. It had to do with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the desire to build an Arab state in the vacuum. It never happened, and Saudi grievances are real, but nonetheless, I mean that was the consequence of this, right? This unwavering support of Israel is about oil, okay, and it's about the fact that they just don't trust the Saudis, and they shouldn't. They've stabbed them in the back before, right? It's really not about any particular support for Israeli policy. It really never has been. It's just all about the geopolitical realities around controlling the oil supply, and the Palestinians just get thrown under the bus. There's the casualty, collateral damage, and the need to control the oil in the region. Okay. Even that said, Sanders has taken some really bold positions on the campaign trail. It may not be far enough for most activists, but even on this issue, it's still incomparably better. Okay? Clear lesser evil. No question about it. Okay? But still a lesser evil. I think that if you follow the argument properly, the best thing that activists in the United States can do on the Palestine issue is support the shift to renewable energy. Okay? If you can get off oil, we can get off Israel too. And you're just bluntly not at all likely to see positive changes in American policy in the region until that shift to energy independence is completed. I think that the broader understanding for this is lacking. People want to compare it to South Africa. They want to boycott things. The real issue is oil. The real issue is getting off the oil. And, if you really want justice for Palestine, you probably want to spend less time trying to boycott things and more time trying to get solar panels up. Because that's the only thing that's going to actually work. We're getting out of the nation building business and instead focusing on creating stability in the world. That could be a direct quote from George W. Bush, and it's probably neither coincidence nor calculation. Rather, I suspect that this speech was literally written by Bush's old speechwriters. That's a quote from Trump's foreign policy speech. But something else is curious. If you take away the 2 or 3 lines about trade and the opaque barbs at Obama, it sounds exactly like something Hillary would say. It is curious, isn't it? The idea of getting out of the nation building business, that was something that Bush said over and over and over again when he was campaigning. And I bet he really wanted to do it too. I have no doubt that Bush was in his heart of heart, he was an isolationist. He didn't want to blow up half the world. He didn't. But, events happened, and he ended up under the sway of people that had a plan that was already in place, right? The whole project for the New American Century got launched, and we're still dealing with that bullshit, which, in fact, Hillary has broadcast on multiple occasions, loud and clear, and in fact, by her own actions as Secretary of State, that she is in full compliance with. So, what is this Trump speech? Kind of sounds like he's the new Bush, right? The new puppet, the new boss, same as the old one, right? Trump's mild appeal as a possible lesser evil is fading fast as he gets in line and becomes a spokesperson for the Republican old guard. If you voted for him to flip the TPP, you've been had. Might it have been a ploy from the start? We're getting mixed signals from Donald Trump, but I think that he's a pawn, and he's very quickly aligning with the establishment and very much just doing what he's told. So please vote for Jill Stein, or do not vote at all. I am advocating the no-fly zone, both because I think it would help us on the ground to protect Syrians. I'm also advocating it because I think it gives us some leverage in our conversations with Russia. This is absolute, total neocon saber rattling. Okay? If you want that, great. Clinton is certainly more of the imperial candidate than Trump is. That's for sure. You want to vote for wars in the Middle East, then do it. But if you don't, then please educate yourself as to what it is that you're voting for. She's very clear about this, okay? It's all about the great game with Russia. It's her entire strategy in the Middle East comes right out of the Brzezinski playbook. Brzezinski was a Democrat, let's remember. It's the whole project for a new American Century, neocon shit that we tried to get rid of 8 years ago, but didn't really. If you want continuation, she's your gal. Okay, she's your candidate. If you don't like this path and you want to go on a different path, you might want to look at the other options. And if it's a really important issue to you, you may have to make some compromises.